The SciComm Collective acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands we study, write and record on, and their sovereignty was never ceded. Hello and welcome to the SciComm Collective.
Different useful knowledge in different areas.
The joy is sharing it, making science accessible, the ignored final step of the scientific method.
Every different perspective.
Science is culture.
The SciComm Collective brings science and science communication to you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our summer short series where we're talking with graduates of the Science Presentations Unit at UWA all about podcasting. I'm Emma, a Master of Science Communication student, and in this episode I'm excited to introduce Bachelor of Science student Anna Balaguer, who's created a mini podcast all about anglerfish mating. Woo, romantic music. Hi Anna.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Before we get into the juicy bits, can you tell us a little about yourself and what brought you to science communication?
Yeah, of course. So I am currently studying a Bachelor of Science, major in zoology, and I did a minor in the science communication, which I have now finished. I was first introduced to science communication when I was like a younger kid, and I would spend inordinate amounts of time on YouTube watching like SciShow, Hank Green, Emily Grassley, people like that, and I was just like enamored with this concept of like scientific concepts being spoken about. And so when I got a bit older, I worked at Questacon for a year, and that's what really kind of propelled my passion for science communication. I really loved speaking with people about science and seeing people get into it as someone who enjoyed science myself. So that was kind of my intro, and then when I learnt that I could do a minor in it here at UWA, I was like, well, I'm obviously doing that. That's really right in my ballpark, so I did, and it was really good. It was great.
So during your minor, you did a unit on science presentations. That was last year, I think?
Yeah, I did that unit last year, yeah.
It stays with you, right?
Yeah, it really, I think it was actually my favourite out of all the SciComm units. That one was my favourite presentations.
Hear that, Heather? I'm sure you're listening. Heather, of course, is the unit coordinator. During the unit, we had to create a 3 to 4 minute podcast episode, which you've created as if it was part of a series.
Yes.
Can you tell us what inspired your choice of topic?
Yeah, so as a zoology major, one of my favourite topics to learn about has always been sexual selection. I think it's really interesting how we all animals kind of have to reproduce in some way, but there's like hundreds of ways that it happens. And when you look into it, it can get like really, really weird. I always thought that to be like really fascinating. So I was kind of reading around a different kind of mating strategies, and anglerfish mating definitely stood out as kind of like the weirdest. But yeah, a lot of strange stuff happens in the animal kingdoms, like specifically in the deep sea. It gets pretty wacky. But yeah, I just thought it was like really interesting, and I also felt like sex is something that everyone can relate to. Scientist or not, like everyone has some kind of relationship with sex. And so it's like a topic that can reach a lot of audiences and that a lot of people are just like predisposed to being curious or interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like it was pretty easy to slip into that as an idea. But what did you find was most challenging about creating this podcast?
Finding the right music that wasn't copyrighted. It's the hardest part. It's really tough. You really got to look in the right places.
Where did you find your music in the end?
Honestly, like on YouTube, and then I would just convert it to MP3 file or whatever and then use that.
Yeah, okay. There you go. There's a hint for those of you listening. If you're looking for copyright-free music, check out YouTube. Make sure that you check, is it in the comments? Sometimes they say whether it's copyrighted or available or not.
Yeah, it's usually like right in the title. Sometimes I'll have it in the description, but usually it's just like royalty-free sexy music or whatever.
That's very cool.
Right in the title, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well there we go. That's a great hint. Can you tell us about something that you loved doing when making this podcast?
I really enjoyed coming up with jokes and ways to convey the information in a way that's not daunting for a layperson audience or a casual audience. I think it's like, it can be a bit challenging sometimes. It's like someone in the zoology major, you kind of like, there's a very specific way that you write papers and you kind of communicate information for a scientific audience, and then changing that up for like entertainment purposes can be a challenge sometimes, but I find it like a very enjoyable stimulating challenge.
Did you have to try out the jokes on a lot of people?
I actually didn't try them on anyone, and maybe that's why some of them fall flat.
Nah, I think like humour is one of those things that's so personal, but I think that if it makes yourself laugh, then there's probably someone else out there who laughs at it too.
Yeah, that's true.
So it sounds like you really quite enjoyed making this podcast, and I can't wait to play it. But just before we do, is there anything that you'd like our listeners to take away from? What was the main message that you were hoping to achieve with your episode?
I think probably that science can be silly, it can be goofy, it can be funny and interesting. I think that some people might have like a bit of a fear or like an aversion to science because it can be serious sometimes and often is presented that way, and like something that like if you don't understand it then it's just not for you. And I think that's like a really dangerous kind of mentality or like relationship that people might have with science. And so I really hope that content like this and like scientific content presented in like a funny or goofy kind of way can kind of help to shift that perception of science as like something that's really serious business all the time. And it often is, but it's like it can also be this, and it often is this. It just needs to be presented that way sometimes, I find.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. Okay, well, let's take a listen to your episode.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Bone Zone podcast, the mini-pod series where we learn about all the freaky, weird and wonderful ways that animals get it on. I'm your host, Anna, and I want to thank you for joining me today. This episode will be the first of 5 in our Deep Sea series. So what constitutes deep sea? Well, deep sea is broadly defined as the depth where light begins to fade, and this starts at about 200 meters deep and goes all the way down into the ocean trenches. When we're this deep into the ocean, conditions can get pretty rough. There's little to no light, it's very cold, and there's not as much food availability. To survive in these conditions, deep sea animals have developed a pretty unique look. If you're unfamiliar with what deep sea biodiversity might look like, picture huge eyes, transparent and/or unusually shaped bodies, sharp teeth, bioluminescence, and just generally like a really weird, scary vibe. For those of you who are already well versed in deep sea creatures, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that they've got some seriously wacky mating rituals. So let's get into the Kama Sutra of the deep sea, where this week we'll be looking at deep sea anglerfish. If you need a refresher, anglerfish are those scary-looking fish that are known for having a little dangling light that sticks out of their forehead, and this acts as a lure to attract prey. Anglerfish are actually a really great example of sexual dimorphism, which is where the different sexes of the same species exhibit varying physical traits that aren't directly involved in reproduction, like how male birds usually have brighter plumage than female birds, or how female mammals tend to be smaller than male mammals. For deep-sea anglerfish, it's actually only females that have a light. Male anglerfish are up to 60 times smaller than females and don't really have fangs or even a proper gut. As soon as male anglerfish hatch, their whole purpose is to find a pretty lady anglerfish to spend his whole life with, literally. The males find their mates by smelling out a pheromone that the females produce. Once he finds a female, he bites into her belly and then his mouth kind of dissolves away and their tissues begin to fuse together. So romantic. The male's blood vessels then fuse with the female's, which allows him to get all of his nutrients from her blood. Since he's fused to his mate, he doesn't really need to move or see anymore, so his eyes, fins, and some internal organs degenerate, and his existence is basically reduced to being a built-in sperm factory. Oh, and by the way, they stay like that forever, until they die. Codependent much? This phenomenon is known as sexual parasitism. Sounds sexy. When the female is ready to reproduce, her body sends out a hormone that triggers sperm release in the male. The sperm then travels through their shared circulatory system to reach and fertilize the eggs. Crazy, right? So why have anglerfish developed this insane mating strategy? Earlier, we touched on the fact that the deep sea can be a challenging environment to survive, let alone reproduce in. Anglerfish have evolved sexual parasitism to battle a few challenges, one of them being the scarcity of mates. Finding a mate in the deep ocean can be super difficult, so fusing with your mate is a great way of locking him down and ensuring your reproductive success. If you like it, then you should have fused to her belly. Sorry. Anyway, other benefits of sexual parasitism include things like the conservation of energy and reducing competition. So it's kind of weird, but they seem to be doing it right. So now you know all about deep sea anglerfish and how they make sweet, sweet love. Next week, we'll continue in our deep sea series by looking at the giant squid and how they get freaky. Spoiler alert, there is stabbing involved. Kinky. Thank you for listening. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Bone Zone, and maybe you learned something you could use in the bedroom. Actually, please don't. Not for this episode anyway. See you next week.
Wow, thank you for sharing your episode. I love that.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yes, it made me laugh quite a few times. I liked the jokes that you were putting in, the lightheartedness. I totally laughed along with the canned laughter.
I'm so glad you did.
I liked how you broke down that science in a way that was relatable and you gave really good examples. But having listened back to that now, and it was a year ago, do you think there's anything that, having done a little bit more science communication since then, is there anything that you would maybe even change about your episode?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some things that I didn't realise at the time about science communication that have really been drilled into me now, particularly having to do with, like, the content is often not enough. Like, you can have really good content, but if you present it in a way that's not engaging enough, it won't achieve your goal. And I think there are some bits in the middle where I do kind of just get a little too heavy on the science and I kind of don't fill the background with music, or I get a little too relaxed on the sound bites, whereas if I kept it engaging through those other sounds, it might have been a little bit more effective. So I feel like I would probably change that, like maybe keep the music running the whole way through, or put in different sounds kind of in the middle there. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is probably I would change the tone or the inflection in my voice a little bit more throughout the episode. I think I am a naturally monotonous speaker, and I think that's fine if you're like that. But it definitely helps to kind of be a bit more like bubbly or exciting, or like just change up your voice a little bit when you're podcasting, because it can help to keep people engaged. So I think that's probably something I would change as well. But those are probably the two main things.
We always think most critically about things that we do ourselves. And so, like, from my perspective, I found that the way that you spoke it was really clear, and it was a good speed for me as a listener. And so I personally found that it was quite a nice way of speaking. I liked the way your voice, it fit the theme. Like, were you going for a sexy voice because it sounded that way?
I actually was. Yeah, I was trying very hard to speak sexily while I was recording this. So I'm really glad that came through.
But I hear what you're saying. Like, it's really hard to get the pace right, and it's so hard to fit in what you want to say in that amount of time, which is why we probably always go over in our episodes.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's lots to chat about.
On that, let's talk about what's next for you.
So I've still got one semester of my degree left, my zoology degree. And then I think that I actually want to do a master's in biological sciences, so I'll do that. It would be really fun for me to continue kind of existing in a science communication space as well.
Well, that's amazing. I love that you want to keep doing SciComm. For our listeners then, could you share a science communication or podcasting hint or tip that they could take away perhaps in the future if they wanted to do their own SciComm?
Yeah, I think when it comes to communicating science, one of the most important things is to know your audience very well and tailor your content to that audience. I think like the efficacy of communicating your information is really not just on the content of what you're saying, but also how you're presenting it. And so obviously if you're going to present it to children, you need to make sure that it's understandable to children, but also make sure that you're presenting it in a way that children would respond to, like be enthusiastic, be bubbly, be silly, things like that. Whereas if you speak to a more mature audience, maybe those things aren't necessarily so important. But I think it's very important to kind of understand your audience well and make sure that you're making things for them, because that's what you're doing. You're making things for people so people can understand. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. And a second thing specific to if you're doing the units. I think if you get a choice, and you often do get a choice to speak about whatever you want in a science-related topic, it's really important to speak about things that are close to you, like close to your heart. It's much easier to act enthusiastic about something if you actually are enthusiastic about it, and that when you love something and you speak about it, it really comes through very strongly. So I think it's important to always kind of chase what appeals to your own curiosity and to share that with people, because it can be really impactful to kind of share what you love with other people, and people, I think, really respond to that quite well.
Thank you. That's really great advice, Anna. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our website and socials for more great content. We'll catch you next time on the SciComm Collective.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at thescicommcollective.com. That's com with 2 M's. Questions or comments about today's episode? Get in touch on Instagram at the SciComm Collective. The SciComm Collective is supported by UWA's Grand Challenges Impact Grant.